Hey folks, Russell here, coming from the house. Just wanted to shoot a follow-up video to the engine replacement in our 96 Jeep Cherokee, the XJ. We ran into a few problems getting it to run after the motor swap was done. I'm going to chalk some of it up to poor quality aftermarket parts, and I'll talk about that throughout the video. So this is just a quick follow-up, and let's talk about the Jeep. So obviously if you watched the previous video, which I'll put a link to up top, where we did the replacement on the engine due to a myriad of things. So crank damper walked off, it was leaking oil like a pig, so we decided just to swap the motor out. So let me get it opened up here. We'll get our hood up. And let's talk about Jeep motors, 4 liters. Of course, as per the previous video, the install went in pretty straightforward. This particular motor has not been rebuilt per se, but it has been gone through, meaning every gasket seal was replaced and the bearings were inspected. When we did this, we installed a new Mishimoto radiator, obviously new belts and all new hoses, cleaned up the throttle body. We installed all new NGK, if we can get them NGK, if not Mopar sensors in the vehicle. The one sensor that you cannot get NGK or Mopar for is the crank angle sensor, which you cannot even see. It mounts in the top of the bell housing for the transmission. Comes up here, here's the plug for it. And the other one you cannot get anymore from Mopar or NGK is the cam angle sensor, or the distributor pickup, obviously inside the distributor. So let's talk about what this motor was doing. Once we got it installed, got everything hooked up, all the new sensors put in place, with the exception of the 2 aforementioned sensors. Fired it up, and it didn't quite run right. For starters, when we hit the starter, it didn't sound right, and the motor didn't quite run right. Ran a little rough, a little stumble on idle. So I had another set of injectors, so we replaced the injectors and then started doing sensors. Never could get it to run quite right. Always still had a little bit of stumble at idle, and when I would go to drive it, it would stumble a little bit and then just fall flat on its face like a complete ignition cutout. So I got to thinking, when we swapped this engine out, we pulled an existing good running motor out. Even though it leaked like a pig, it ran great. Swapped parts to this motor, put it in. So it should have run great. The one thing that we replaced new initially was the flex plate. And this is where I'm going to vent about aftermarket quality, or the quality of aftermarket parts. The flex plate on a Jeep is also the trigger wheel for the crank sensor. And the cam angle sensor distributor pickup for in this model does nothing more than tell the computer the timing, the cam timing is right. And I mean, you could be, a few degrees off here or there. It's a general area. All the timing is done off the crank. One sensor, multiple. I mean, it's like 12 holes, pickup holes on the flex plate housing. So the only thing new was the flex plate. So we decided to remove the transmission and change the flex plate. 5 hours of labor later, I've got a new old stock Mopar flex plate in the vehicle. And the motor runs great. Started looking at backup. Once we got the transmission off, I looked at looking inside the bell housing of the transmission, and I could see I could see score marks where the flex plate was rubbing the inside of the bell housing in a couple of spots. I could see metal shavings in the bell housing from the starter engagement. And once we got the flex plate off and compared it with an OEM, the dimensions weren't exact. The gear teeth didn't mesh with the starter well. The lip of the flex plate that holds the pickup wheel was thicker and deeper. So it wasn't right. So we put an OEM one back in it. It runs great. While we were at it, the whole rest of the exhaust system was changed out. So we have a brand new S-pipe and a brand new catalytic converter. This thing runs like a top now, like a sewing machine, as it should. So just a quick follow-up video. If you're doing any work on old Jeeps, if you can get, let's see if I can get some better light. If you can get NGK or OEM, Mopar, Chrysler parts, great. If you went into Mopar right now, a lot of the parts you would get would be rebadged Omix, because Omix has a agreement to sell Mopar parts. They're still garbage made in China. So if you can get NGK or NTK sensors, WVE is the other brand. That's a subsidiary of NGK. So like your coolant temp sensor would be a WVE. Crank angle and cam angle sensors, standard motor products. At least they're not made in China. They're made in, I think, Mexico or something. They work out pretty well. And flex plates. Do not get an ATP flex plate. I'll put a link to all the name brands, or at least the parts, in the description that we used. This is a 96 XJ, so the 4-hole fuel injector upgrade never works in this vehicle. There's not a good equivalent for the specifically for the 96. The fuel pressure it runs at, and the fact that it's not a return line rail, it's just weird. So there's no real upgrade for a 96. 95 and below, yeah, you can upgrade them. 97 and up, you can upgrade them. The 96, you can't. Just doesn't work. And don't let anybody tell you different. 96 is a weird beast. It's OBD2, but it wants to act like it's OBD1. It runs a really high pressure on the rail and it does not have a return. So, yeah, runs great. I'm happy with it now that we've got it fixed, but it's taken a month. So, word to the wise on aftermarket parts. Look at where they're coming from. I'm not always one to bash stuff made in China, because there's some really good stuff made in China, and for the money it's great. But in the case of sensors, I don't want them coming out of China. I may go through, and I run into this with everything we work on, BMWs and Audis and Porsches. If I get a sensor from, CarQuest or WorldPack or AutoZone or whatever, I've got about a 33% failure rate on install. Unless I get an NGK. Try to get NGK, NTK, or the original OE manufacturer. So in the case of a lot of cars, that's Bosch or Vallejo. So, but once again, we got the XJ back. It's running great. So, word to the wise, aftermarket parts suck. If you like this content, go ahead and like, hit subscribe, hit that bell icon for future notification. And as always, there's more to follow.